Jack can edit this out. I can revise. Ketchup and rice.
Ah,
That was the first sentence of my college essay. I am
oh,
ketchup on rice
that's
because I
great.
am kind of your classic
Mm, yeah,
all-American condiment on top
yeah,
of like the traditional kind of meal
yeah.
of or bowl of rice that you have.
Mhm.
So I would say ketchup on rice, Rachel.
From latchkey kids to helicopter parents, join us for a generational showdown. This is You Turned Out Okay with Mrs. B.
Welcome to You Turned Out Okay, the podcast about the stories, surprises, and real life moments that shape our families. I'm your host, Mrs. B. I'm the mom of 3 boys and a grandma to one adorable little human. Today's episode is called Check All That Apply because some families don't fit neatly into one box. This conversation actually started in episode 1, Don't Kiss the Baby, when my daughter-in-law Emma talked about setting boundaries as a new mom and shared how growing up in a Chinese-American family shaped her approach to mothering and how she set boundaries with the grandparents. Listeners loved that moment and wanted more. So today, Emma's back, and she's joined by Dr. Clementine Fujimura, an anthropologist, professor at the U.S. Naval Academy, and matriarch of her own multicultural family. She's here in a personal capacity today, sharing her research and lived experience. Her views are not necessarily those of the U.S. Naval Academy or the U.S. government. Together, we're diving into what it looks like when cultures blend inside a family, their traditions, the stories, the moments of humor, and the spaces where belonging takes shape. So settle in. Let's check all the boxes. I'm going to let you guys introduce yourselves just really quickly. Emma, I know everybody's already met you in the first episode, but go ahead and reintroduce yourself for those that might be joining this episode.
Yeah. Hi, watchers, listeners. I am Emma. I am Rachel's daughter-in-law, wife to her oldest son, and mother of her first grandchild, my first child. Well, my second child. My first is my dog child, Pluto. My second born son is Theo.
That is so millennial, Emma.
Hi, and I'm Clementine Fujimura, and I don't know how millennial that was because I also have four-legged children.
Yes, but you did consider them like your
They
firstborn?
were. I was kind of when we knew each other, they came to all the water polo games and anyway, I have 2 sons, Willem and Tristan, and a lovely husband, and I have 2 dogs who are their brother and sister with 4 legs. And on the side, I teach in college, and I'm an anthropologist. That is actually my background. I'm a cultural anthropologist, and I also do linguistics, and I teach languages and cultures. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So, Clementine, help us with the correct language. Sometimes
Mhm.
I feel like we don't talk about tough subjects, or we don't even even if they're not difficult subjects,
Mhm.
because we don't have the correct language. Are we bicultural? Are we multicultural? Are we biracial? What's kind of the difference?
Mhm. So I really think it has to do with your own perspective. If when we talk about other people, we're labeling them. And so it's always nice to know what they want to consider themselves to be. So if we look at people, racial categories are from a visual only. And some people might be very proud of that and want to be seen as I am biracial. It gets complicated because I don't, 2 races is actually is getting to be a minority with I
Right.
don't know if you know about Hapa, where it used to be just Japanese and white, and now it's anyone Asian. There just has to be some white there somewhere, black. So that gets complicated. Now we're not biracial anymore. Now we're talking many different blends. So I prefer as an anthropologist to think of people and my own family actually as bicultural, even though I sometimes will refer to my family as racially diverse because it has to do with the behaviors and the practices. And when we start talking about behaviors and practices and maybe language, then we're really talking more about culture. So I like to think of myself personally as bicultural. I'm actually German American because that's how I was raised. And I don't look biracial and I'm not biracial, right? So it gets complicated. And I think people have to define themselves for us. Before we label them.
So, Emma, tell us about your family. Do you consider you bicultural, your family growing up?
Yeah, I definitely would consider myself bicultural, and I think for per your definition, I'm Clementine biracial. My father is Chinese, he's from Shanghai, and my mom is American. I guess yeah, bicultural too. My grandmother is Australian, and my parents met in China. Both of them were teaching and then came back to the States. And so I grew up in a very interesting household because while my mom is white and American, she is and was very integrated into Chinese culture when they lived there for many years. She speaks pretty fluently. She would say that she doesn't, but she's really incredible. And her language skills are amazing. And so we grew up kind of in multicultural households. And my father immigrated here in his 30s, in his early 30s. So we would go. I always said Chinese school was my church because Sundays we would go to Chinese school.
Nice.
And we would be traveling every couple years back home to Shanghai to see my family. This past October, I was able to bring my son Theo back to meet my whole family, which was amazing. And I traveled by myself to Shanghai to meet up with my parents. So I would definitely consider myself bicultural, biracial, and I'm really, really proud to be Asian American. I definitely also think, Clementine, you had mentioned this, but in terms of labeling and looking biracial, I am white passing to a lot of people. And that's something that I have struggled with a lot growing up and something that I thought a lot about with raising my son, especially because I was labeled certain things that I didn't intrinsically feel. I felt more connected to my Asian heritage than necessarily to my American heritage. And I've always felt that way. And so that's definitely going to influence a lot of how my husband and I raise our son, also knowing that his family is rooted very much so here in the US. And mine is still so connected to China.
Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, it is interesting. So tell me, I mean, the cultural expectations, Clementine, you talked about your family as well. So were there cultural expectations from the different cultures? How did that play into how you raised your family?
Right. So my husband is Japanese American. He is fourth generation Japanese American. I'm actually first generation German American. So when we go, when we go to parties, people will often go up to my husband and say, "Oh, where are you from?" And he's like, "LA." And his connection to Japan is pretty far, whereas my connection to Germany is really, really close. I grew up
Right.
partially in Germany. So I'm always like, I'm really interesting. I'm the one who, yeah, but I look like everyone else. So for me, it's also interesting that I'm very deeply connected to my German past. But when my kids were born, I really wanted them to be connected to that Japanese side of them. And so I made a huge effort to meet other parents that had children like my children, Hapa children, half. And we even had gatherings together. And so it did influence me. I tried to learn, I'm still trying to learn Japanese. I'm really bad at it.
It's a really hard language, so
Yeah.
don't be hard
Well,
on yourself.
yeah, it's hard, and also I don't have a teacher really, so Duolingo isn't doing it
Right.
anyway. But I tried very hard, almost too overly hard, to connect them to that Japanese side, and not so much to the German because that was coming naturally. So it affected our life, especially when they were little, because I was constantly trying to make room for the Japanese element. And my husband is like, "Why are we doing this?" And so I'm like, "Because it's your heritage. You should want this." And so he felt very much that, yes, he grew up trying and again, it's interesting that when he was raised, his first name is Paul. And so a lot of Japanese Americans give their kids the first name, a very American name, and then the middle name is Japanese so that they can better integrate into the white American world and potentially be more successful than if they're seen as different, especially since the internment camps and that history. So he was fine with just raising American kids, whereas an anthropologist was just, the world of, multiculturalism was exciting to me. So it affected me in the way that I tried really hard to get that into their childhoods for what
That's
it was
so
worth.
that's so interesting because Rachel, do you mind if I pop in?
Nope, I figured you might.
Yeah, so just in terms of like you pushing that cultural aspect more so than your husband, when my
Mhm.
father moved to the States, he felt very discriminated against. And so when he married my mom and my mom had us, I have an older sister. She was the one who really wanted to kind of push integrating his culture into our
Mhm.
family. He was even hesitant for us to take his last name because he didn't
Mhm.
want us to be discriminated against, and he knew that, his kids had a chance to be more white passing, or it would
Mhm.
potentially help them integrate into Western American society more easily. And my mom was the one who really supported making sure. So my last name is Benson Shoe. It's hyphenated.
Mhm.
It's my mom's last name and my dad's last name kind of smushed together. And so I just resonate a lot, and I'm sure my mom would too, with that notion of trying to be supportive of bringing in that culture in a
Mhm.
space that isn't always on the offset as welcoming to
Well,
differences.
similar because, your dad and this is where we're talking about the actual people who bring in the diversity in race, right? And so to avoid racism, and I personally haven't experienced that because as a white person, I don't, unless I'm in his family, but that's another story. No.
Right.
But bottom line is, I'm not a minority, so I don't have that same fear and the same. I did, but I have to say, knowing that, racism can be, the horrors of that. Um, I was very careful where I sent my kids to school. I was very careful to go to a school where culture was celebrated, rather than where I'd have to be worried that they might get bullied because of difference. So I was very protective on the one hand, and that was because I know my husband was, had bad experiences. So of course it's easy for me to say, "Oh, let's celebrate the diversity," when I personally haven't been a target, right?
Mm.
Uh, and it was the outsider kind of appropriating, but the culture, and I try not to be that negative about it, but yeah, it's easy for us white people, right? And my husband was very right to be cautious and to remind me of that throughout their childhood.
Right. Interesting. Emma, it's interesting you talked about how your mom really dove into your Chinese identity. And I was first aware of that when I tried to serve you a cold salad.
Say more. Say more.
Because when you grow up with the Chinese cuisine and all of your greens are
Oh. Yeah,
stir fried or
yeah.
sautéed. And Emma, I remember we're bicultural in that, I'm of Polish heritage, my husband's of Italian, but we really lean into the Italian. So there's lots of salads. And I remember that was my big moment when I realized that even though your mom was American, that's how deeply she leaned into the Chinese heritage.
And maybe that's my just general aversion to leafy greens, in the salad variety. But yeah, I definitely grew up as that kid who brought in a thermos to school, and kids would be like, "Ew, what do you have for lunch? That's weird." And you just beg your parents for a peanut butter jelly sandwich.
Oh, yes. Yeah. The German came out that way too when I was growing up. Some of the cheeses, gorgonzola, the
Yeah,
things that are okay in Germany and in Europe are not okay, or egg salad,
yeah.
Yeah.
So, Emma, was there a time when someone tried to label you or your family and define you that you really pushed back against, or?
That's interesting. I mean, the first thing that comes to mind is playing sports in elementary school, maybe early middle school, like 5th or 6th grade. I played basketball. I'm not hand-eye coordinated at all, but I can be quite aggressive on the court. And at one point, we had to play the all-boys teams in our league because there weren't enough girls teams, and I was wrestling a young boy for the basketball, and I remember him yelling, "Get off me, white girl." And I screamed at him. I said, "I'm not white." And and we got ejected
Wow.
from the game and all of those things. So I
Okay.
think just um
Funny.
being mislabeled
Yeah.
when you are white
Absolutely.
passing. And then I also think too, having my parents also look so differently, in the sense of just
Mhm.
like my father does look very Asian, my mom does look very American. And so seeing my sister, people would see my sister and I with my mom or with my dad and come to conclusions of either to where did you get your children from? Assuming we were adopted, or assuming types of things that I don't maybe as a young child I didn't internalize, but hearing stories and coming into my own as an adult have always stuck with me. And so I think I really make sure on the onset of meeting people, depending on the scenario, to really make sure that they understand how I identify,
Mhm.
because that is such a huge part of my personality, my lifestyle.
Okay.
Um, and the way that I keep that part of me alive when I'm in America, which can be really, really hard, in a space, especially in this political climate where China isn't seen the same to a lot of people, especially if you've never been there, you don't know the culture. And so it's made me even louder and prouder as I've gotten older.
It's interesting that you had that experience of being called maybe adopted. I used when my babies were little, when they were babies, in the mall. It happened that someone would come up not just one time and ask me where I'd gotten my kid from,
Yeah.
and all of them thought because my kids don't look pure Japanese, they would ask if they were from Kazakhstan. And that was interesting because one of the things I did was study adoptions and homeless children in the former Soviet Union. I spent a lot of time there. And so it wasn't at all. And I worked with children from Kazakhstan and other parts of Russia. So to me, I was like, I could see how you would think that. And it was almost endearing because I had considered adopting a child from that part of the world. On the other hand, there were those 12 hours of labor that I wanted credit for.
Yeah.
I made that clear. Yeah.
I think that's what Philippa said to me once she told me that story. And that's always her response. Where do you get them? My womb. That's what she said.
Yes.
So tell me, what traditions have you intentionally kept that are really representative of your cultures? And then maybe what new ones have you created?
So, in terms of traditions, there aren't that many in terms of Japanese culture, except for the language and the food, I guess, is really big. We do love sushi. It's interesting. We've mixed cultures. So, German Christmases are big, and well, Easter is big everywhere, but Christmas in particular is a very specific way we celebrate it. That's German. It's on the 24th in the evening. And in Germany, there's usually, there's special foods for that. I do the Christmas cookies, I do that, but then we do the Japanese food on Christmas. So we blend the two cultures together on Christmas, for example. So we always keep everything alive if we can. So that's an example. Yeah.
That's lovely.
It's interesting you say Christmas, because I think, and food particularly, because I always think at Christmas, it's so interesting because my family does Christmas on Christmas Day,
Mhm.
and there is always rice. There is
Mhm.
always something Asian. Like, it's a
Yeah.
very but there are then very traditional aspects. My parents are incredible cooks, both of them, like, in their kind of
Mhm.
own realms. And so,
Yeah.
I think too, food is something huge. Um, and something that, again, allows me to kind of feel like I'm home in China when I'm home in the US. And again, Chinese school was just something that was such a ritual. That's always also a place of feeling left out in a completely opposite way than I did in regular school, where I was seen as like the white kid,
Hmm.
like kind of being too white for Chinese school and always like
Mhm.
having a really hard time making friends because like what's this white passing girl doing in a full Chinese school full of Chinese kids. And so it was it was much harder for me to actually like make friends, assimilate in Chinese school than it was in regular school. But otherwise, yeah, traditions, doing Chinese like Lunar New Year, Mid-Autumn festivals, a lot of mooncakes, a lot of dumplings,
Mhm.
a lot of chopsticks. And my husband Max knows, like, we do not use not nice chopsticks in our household.
Mhm. Mhm.
Little things like that. We have
Mhm.
these traditional knots, Chinese knots that are always around my parents' house and mine, and little trinkets and things. And also now speaking to my son in Mandarin and trying to help make sure that that language stays alive in my
Mm.
home as he grows up.
Mm. Language is so important, so intrinsic to really getting the full culture, right?
Yeah.
So my mother actually one day called me in tears when my kids were little, and she was so upset. She said, "I had a nightmare. I dreamt you didn't teach them German."
Mm.
We were living in Russia at the time, and so I was speaking German to them when my husband wasn't home. But there was a woman who would take my kid to the Montessori school, Willem, and she would speak Russian. So by
Mm.
the time my husband came home, my kids were so confused because there was German, there was English, there
Right.
was. So I did. I phased out the German. My kids know baby language in German. They know how did you sleep? You know, it's time to go to sleep. They know all the little ritual sentences. But I did. I sent them to McDonough because they were supposed to learn German there. And Willem was the last of the German classes, and Tristan, my little one, didn't get that. So it was very sad. That being said, things like fairy tales and songs and all of that, we did keep that alive. And in fact, I was just thinking the story of the gingerbread man. We had a story we would read at night to them, the Musubi man. That was a Japanese fairy, but it was just like the American. So it was a kind of like a hodgepodge. Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
I have to say, Emma, I am so grateful for the tradition of the Chinese New Year.
Mm.
And, you know, Emma's dad, Ben, yeah, I think a couple of years ago when you and Max, before you got engaged, had us over and taught us how to make dumplings. But it is funny, every year he does this, he cooks also ahead of time all this amazing food. And then he does most of the dumplings just in case we screw up the dumplings.
Yes, yes. My dad and I like to make sure that the first 100 are completed.
Exactly. And I think
That's
the
great.
first time we
I'm coming
had
over.
the dumpling making over
Yeah, yeah.
Chinese New Year, I swear I ate 3 dozen. I am not exaggerating. But yeah, that was funny. And last year
So
he
great.
did that. He had, the pretty ones already done. And then the rest of us kind of
Right.
made a handful just for fun.
Yeah. So cool. Well, it's nice. That's really
Yeah.
nice. See, the Paul's family was so Americanized and worked so hard that the parents spoke Japanese, but again, the kids didn't learn Jap. He learned it in school and then in college, but not from the family because this urge to make sure that again, the internment camp was a really scary, horrible thing that happened and to be never repeated. So the parents wanted to do everything to make sure their kids were going to be successful.
Well, and I think that's interesting. So much of what we talk about on You Turned Out Okay is those generational points of view,
Mhm.
right? And how it's different. So that generation, older generations wanting to not be an immigrant, right? And now, Emma, you and Clementine, obviously you want to embrace it,
Mhm.
right? So
Mhm.
there's a different perspective on what that might look like,
Yeah.
right?
And maybe even like a little bit of like unlearning and undoing of, so like on top of it just being a different perspective, also trying to not fix, but you know what I'm saying, like make sure that what was not given in certain spaces that I had, make sure that my son has that in his spaces. And I think that that's like a unique experience to being, for me, biracial, bicultural, that might not resonate kind of with people who aren't.
Another thing you brought up that's interesting that I feel I worried about with my children, I certainly experienced it, was that you're never, and my husband experienced it too. So, for example, in the United States, I was always seen as the German kid or the, not fully American. And when I went to Germany, and I did grow up partially there and go to school there, I was the American. So, where no matter where I was not one of them. And you
Mm,
mentioned something similar to that. My husband had the same. Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely, I resonate a lot with that, and I think
Mhm.
even, um, in adulthood, I still have to remind myself that, a lot of things when you were kids too, it's like, "Oh, like, make a pie,"
Mhm.
and break up in the pie all of the different things that you are,
Mhm.
and, like, all of your,
Mm.
hobbies or
Mhm. Mhm.
personalities or, uh, cultural, ethnic pieces of you, and something that I really have had to drill into my brain as I've been growing in adulthood is that everything that I want to be, I'm not just little pieces of that, and I think
Mhm.
that that's helped me feel less other in
Mm.
certain spaces when I could be perceived as other, because that is a whole part of me, not just a tiny sliver of a piece. So I definitely think that that's hard to feel when you enter spaces that you're
Mhm.
never white enough or you're never Asian enough. And I've
Mhm.
definitely had to come to terms with that as I've gotten older.
Mhm. I think that's why I became an anthropologist because as an anthropologist, you're always the outsider trying to figure out what people are thinking and feeling and how and so I that was my life growing up was trying to figure out how can I be more American and how can I be more German, and so that just led me straight down the path of doing that for the rest of my life,
it,
wondering how
it's
everybody belongs.
it's interesting. That's one of the questions I was going to
Oh,
ask you.
yeah.
So you're ahead of me on that one.
Sorry.
All right. Couple some just practical advice and wisdom. What should people not say to a bicultural family?
I would say ask more questions. I'd say what to do as opposed to
Right.
what not to do.
Right.
Just be curious, let them tell you. I think if you jump in with assumptions, any assumption's going to be wrong. It's just like, forget it. So, yeah.
Emma, what would you think? What not to say or what to say?
Yeah. I mean, that's a great question. Since you said that, Clementine, that's the only
Mm.
thing that now I can think of. But I definitely think um maybe you were saying ask more questions, but like observe and
Mhm.
take in information, see how people do things differently, and engage in those differences. And like
Mhm.
you said, ask questions, be curious, because I think that sometimes it's much easier as someone who's used to not being so seen in the way that they want to be seen, is that people aren't that interested. So either you have to express it yourself or you don't express it at all because no one asks. So making sure that you're curious and making sure too that you're encouraging those types of conversations with your friends and with your family. And if others are talking about somebody else, even if you're not there, you can encourage that type of critical thinking, even not being in those situations yourself, if that makes sense.
There's one thing I would say though. So if you see it for my husband, I think I brought that up before. Where are you from?
Yeah,
Is assuming they're not from here. And I think that's, othering, alienating to the individual you're talking to sometimes. So,
right, right. And then it's that, no, Okay, but
Where are
where
you
are your
really from?
parents from? Where are your grandparents from? Yeah, those like
How about
leading
I always wanna
questions.
say, "How about you?"
Yeah, 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 right, right.
Yeah, yeah.
So tell me, what would be a good piece of advice to give grandparents, raising children from multiple cultures?
That's on you.
Maybe, and I think you guys like do this well, with my family, but I definitely think not poo-pooing certain things. Mm, I think that it can be daunting alone to raise your first child, let alone raise your first child in a slightly different way than your parents or your in-laws have raised their child. And then on top of that, adding the cultural element, the multicultural element to it can be daunting. And having a safe space with people who, like we were just talking about, are curious, ask questions, and engage with us is really important. Like, I would hope that, and Max and I have talked about this, putting Theo in Chinese school when he's old enough. I would hope that you and Pete would come
Oh,
sometimes and drop them off
absolutely.
or pick them up. It's not just like a singular experience for one person, it's an experience for a whole family. Again, like multiple generations. And I think that I'm going to be learning a lot about myself. I'm going to be learning a lot about my family, but I'm also going to be learning a lot about your family throughout that process. And I think it will always be helpful to have people that champion you and your differences and things that they don't understand, and have the time to think critically themselves about maybe their biases that they might have going into it, and be able to come in with a critical lens and a self-reflective lens if that is necessary to be our best for this tiny
Mhm.
human.
Yes.
All right. So when we're talking about our multicultural or our bicultural families, finish this sentence. Our family's superpower is what makes your family, what's that superpower you guys have?
I have a totally annoying answer to that, so I'm gonna just say it before we get real again, but our superpower is that we really value, like, in a deep way, um, different cultures. We are curious, and we're really excited about my kid. Both my kids went to the Naval Academy, and both of them had interviews to go study abroad, and they totally rocked those interviews.
Yeah, I'm
Whereas
sure.
other kids are, "Why do you want to go abroad?" I'm like, "Well, you can be really cool to see the Eiffel Tower." I don't know, you know. But they were because it's going to make me a better person. It's going to make me more adaptable. It's going to continue to be what I already am and just make me better. And so that approach to going to the adaptability piece is also a big one. I think that's a superpower.
Yeah, that's great. Emma, you got one?
Yeah, I think, that adaptability piece that you spoke about is huge. Being able to, and I think again that comes from being part of a lot of different spaces and places and people, to be able to assimilate into a lot of different spaces and places with different people.
Mhm.
Um, for me, walking into like a multicultural home sometimes feels like a safer space for me,
Mhm.
because you just know that people think a little bit differently. Not to say that in other spaces that aren't multicultural, you don't have that, but I think there's just that je ne sais quoi about, um, households that have that ability to welcome anybody and everybody and make people feel really, really comfortable, because we do ask those questions. I think something that I was raised on is, and something my friends would say is, I'm always asking people how their families are. How is your mom? How is your dad? How are your siblings? How are your grandparents? And I think that spans a lot of that can span a lot of different places for people, physically, emotionally, all of that. And I think having that inquisitive mindset and a welcoming mindset allows people to share more of themselves. And I think that that's helped me and my family be able to have those really deep relationships with people, and also um make chosen family. in people who aren't necessarily blood related or things of that nature. And I think that that's a really, really beautiful, beautiful thing.
So your superpower sounds to me also that you're fearless, because I think a lot of the trepidation about coming head to head with another culture is a sense of is fear. I mean, if you haven't been exposed to it, if you haven't grown up as a minority in a place or as the other in a place, I mean that's something that we then all have in common is that we've gone through that when we were really young and know how to deal with that. But people who haven't, when they meet someone from somewhere else, there's a little bit of I don't know. So that makes you more fearless, I would
Right.
think.
I love that.
Yeah.
I think what like right when you said that, I was like, yes, I view my parents as
Yeah.
such fearless, incredible people who are, that I love
Mm.
that.
Well, you're trailblazers in a way. You're literally blazing your own trail.
Well, so are you, it sounds like,
Yeah.
Polish, Italian. You didn't get there yet.
I try.
Oh, oh.
I do consider myself a little fearless, which is why I
Mhm,
think I have such powerful daughter-in-laws. I mean,
mhm.
you know,
Yeah,
they're all very different, but these
yeah.
boys definitely all chose well, and they
Mhm. That's
did
awesome.
not choose shrinking violets by any
Mhm.
stretch of the imagination. So
Great.
all of them are very fearless.
Yeah, interesting.
All right, so I've got a couple rapid fire. I've got
Mhm.
3 questions and just gonna be really quick. Emma will go to you first and
Okay.
Clementine second, and I've got 3 questions, okay?
Okay, I'm
One
ready.
food that represents your cultures.
Rice.
So that's really difficult. Are we talking the German or the
Yeah,
Japanese?
yeah.
Well, you can do both. You can
Well,
do both.
Japanese, of course, sushi is sort of like symbolic, right? It's
Right,
become a
right.
thing, for I, I don't like German food. It's meat and potatoes, and I'm vegetarian.
Pretzel. Oh, you're a vegetarian, okay.
Wait, also Jack can edit this out. I can revise. Ketchup and rice.
Ah,
That was the first sentence of my college essay. I am
oh,
ketchup on rice
oh, that's
because I
great.
am kind of your classic
Mm, yeah,
all-American condiment on top
yeah,
of like the traditional kind of meal of
yeah.
bowl of rice that you have.
Mhm.
So I would say ketchup on rice, Rachel.
Oh my gosh, I think you just, like, hit our outtake for
Yeah,
this episode.
perfect.
How do I identify? Identify as ketchup on rice.
Right,
Yes,
right.
yes.
Yep.
Okay.
Mhm.
All right, second question. 1 or 2 traditions you'll never give up.
Um,
Hmm.
one or two traditions I'll never give up. That's
Hmm.
a rapid fire question?
Yeah, yeah.
I have mine even. I know what mine are.
Say yours.
Yeah, say
Well,
yours.
because I've got the Polish background,
Mhm,
making pierogies and kielbasi.
mhm,
That's the Polish
mhm,
thing, and I will say with Pete being Italian, it's Christmas Eve. I won't
mhm.
give up. You know, Christmas Eve is kind of my holiday and everything that goes into that. So, but yeah, the pierogies and kielbasi. I'm
Mhm.
probably one of the few people still making pierogies by hand.
That's very cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, so I think language is a tradition, and to me, I personally want to learn more languages and maintain my all my languages at all times. Even though I'm considered fluent in a few, I still, I read in them and I write in them, and the songs that go with the cultures are very important to me. Japanese, not so much, but certainly German folk songs. They're very corny, and I love them, and I sing them in the shower loudly. I'll never give them up.
That's awesome. All right, I mean, do you have one?
Oh man, 2 traditions. I'm like trying to think 2 from like both sides.
Like, I mean, you do talk about things that you want to build with Theo, you
Yeah,
know?
well, I mean, I definitely think traditions of like going back home to China. That is
Mhm,
something that I did as a child throughout my
mhm.
life and throughout my adulthood, and I definitely want to continue that. My grandmother is the last living grandparent that I have, and even when she passes, I have my aunts and my cousins, and I want to make sure that that's something that Theo gets to do, that Max gets to do. Hopefully, my in-laws get to
Yeah.
join me, but something that is just like my favorite time, and I feel like my favorite version of myself when I'm back there and I travel back
Mm,
there. So I definitely think I want to continue that tradition.
That's a great one.
That's great. All right, one last one. What is one stereotype you'd love to retire forever?
Mm. the uptight German. I'm just not that. Funny. Yeah.
Ooh, there are a lot. Sorry, I know you said rapid fire.
Nope, you can give me two.
Or the nerdy Asian.
I was
Yeah,
just gonna
yeah, the
say two.
nerdy, maybe the nerdy Asian, the good at math Asian, I would say. I'm only half. I didn't get that. I didn't get those math genes, but yeah, I think that like stereotype of kind of performance over everything, that's definitely not necessarily how I was raised. And I think it's important too, as I'm getting older and being able to understand the value in all of these different skill sets, and all of these different ways of living life and of growing yourself as a professional and as a person, um, and kind of celebrating that.
That's awesome. All right. Well, that is all I have, guys. You
Great.
were
Thank you so much.
awesome. Thank
Thanks
you
for
so
having me.
much. Thank you for joining Check All That Apply. I love this conversation, and I'm so grateful to Emma and Clementine for sharing their stories, their perspectives, and their experiences so openly. If this episode made you think about your own family or the cultures that shaped you, please share it with someone who might enjoy it too. And don't forget to follow the show and leave a review. It really helps others find us. I'm Mrs. B. Thanks for listening. I'll see you in 2 weeks.